When the Suns first brought in Mike Budenholzer along with some new offseason signings, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. After 19 games, what stood out most to me is the effect these changes have had on Kevin Durant, who's having one of the best seasons of his career in year 17. One thing that I've felt has always been underrated in KD's game, maybe now more than ever, is how effective he is in the open floor. That combination of length, athleticism, and touch as a finisher is just a lot to deal with when he's playing with pace, and that's without even mentioning the fact that at any given moment, he's a threat to slam the brakes and rise up for a jumper. As of right now, he's 7th in the NBA at over 6 points a game in transition, but it's the efficiency that really jumps out, scoring 1.73 points per possession, good for the 99th percentile among all players. Most of these are a result of leaking out after missed shots or turnovers, but a decent amount of them come as a function of Phoenix's offense. If you're familiar with how OKC likes to use Chet Holmgren in early offense, often setting flare screens as he trails the play, giving him space to step into as a shooter, the Suns have implemented these exact same actions for Durant as a trailer, who happens to be a pretty good shooter himself. Like Chet, he's got an absurdly high release point that becomes even more difficult to contest when you're scrambling to cover in transition, but he pairs that with some of the greatest shot making we've ever seen. Just like in transition, I'm not sure KD ever got proper credit for the sheer caliber of spot-up shooter he's been over the course of his career. Dating back to his MVP season with the Thunder, he's only ever shot below 38% from 3 off the catch once, and you could argue he's actually at his absolute best right now, hitting nearly 44% of these opportunities over the past 3 years. That number becomes even more absurd if you only look at threes where he was left wide open. Since returning from the Achilles injury in 2020, he's attempted 156 wide open threes and made 80 or more than half of them, a 51.3% clip to be exact. Needless to say, he's not a guy who can be left open by any means, and the respect he demands as a shooter is what opens up his game as an off-the-catch attacker. Whether it's driving to the rim or stepping into a one-dribble pull-up, the guy absolutely torches closeouts or rotating defenses, which is part of what made him so lethal in Golden State when he was playing off of the gravity of shooters like Steph and Klay within a motion-heavy system. Since then, he's been asked to operate like a lead ball handler a lot more, whether that means isolating from the elbow or setting up spread pick and roll, and the first point of emphasis I've noticed under Budenholzer has been getting back to using KD more as the superhuman off-ball scorer he is. When I said that he was lights out as a catch and shoot guy, I didn't just mean after spotting up along the perimeter and waiting for kickout passes. He's a legit threat to shoot while moving in any direction, regardless of momentum, which means that they can run sets designed to get him threes. In the past, he'd run off down screens and cross screens like this all the time, but those were typically to set up long twos or jumpers around the elbow. Turning them into threes not only creates more space and puts more stress on the defense, it makes Durant's shot diet just a little bit more efficient than it already was. This season, over 35% of his attempts have been from behind the three-point line, which is a new career high. If we compare that to the few seasons prior, you'll notice that he's been in the mid to high 20s for a while now, so what we're witnessing is a clear shift in approach. And when you set these screens out on the three-point line, he's still a threat to utilize all of those different areas. He can take one dribble and get to the mid-range. If he's being top-locked or the side of the screen is being overplayed, he's quick to reject the action on a backdoor cut. Another thing you'll see quite a bit is KD screening for the ball. Of course, he's constantly hunting for the pop, where, like I said, he's impossible to contest, but it's important to note that one of the reasons they're able to use him in so many different ways is because they actually have a legitimate initiator in Tyus Jones, setting up the offense and hitting Durant in advantageous spots. It goes without saying, though, that when the Suns set up ball screen action involving KD, he's typically the one with the ball in his hands. That doesn't necessarily mean spread pick and roll, though. A staple in this year's offense has been lots of Spain pick and roll, with one of the wings setting a back screen on the initial screener's defender, and the goal is to create more downhill pressure by occupying that extra helper. For a guy like Durant, who's typically looking to get to his mid-range pull-up in these spots, that extra screen has helped him generate more paint touches. Then when they do go to the classic spread pick and roll look, they're very meticulous in how they space the floor. Notice how instead of spotting up on the wing, Booker's deep in the corner alongside Tyus, and the idea is to keep Jimmy away from the middle. So when KD rejects the screen on a right-hand drive, there's no nail help and he easily gets to the rim. Here's another example. This time Booker is on the wing as KD gets ready to come off a screen, and instead of spotting up, he clears out with a cut. That pulls Deni Avdija, who would be the nail help, away from the middle, leaving KD with a ton of room to operate. And the thing about KD is that when he's left with space to attack off of screens, there really isn't anything the defense can do to take him out of his comfort zone. The Lakers found that out the hard way in their in-season tournament game. When they kept their big back in a deep drop, KD just got to those automatic pull-up jumpers I talked about. When they brought that big closer to the level of the screen to close that space, he patiently worked his way in close to apply pressure and make the right reads. Then finally, when they decided to avoid the numbers advantage altogether with a switch, that's when KD got to work one-on-one and torched them in isolation. For everything I've talked about, from the transition and off-ball game to the pick and roll, the isolation game is still Kevin Durant's bread and butter. And that's because no matter who you throw at him, he's basically unfazed by any defender in single coverage. Anyone who's big enough to contest his shot likely can't stick with him. Even at age 36, the agility and wide array of moves is just remarkable. And anyone agile enough to stick with those moves and stay in his airspace likely doesn't have the length to contest that incredibly high release point. It's no surprise that Durant actually prefers to have those smaller defenders, because all he really has to do to generate a quality look is turn and shoot. So if he's operating out in space, they'll often have one of their wings come and screen the ball so that they can force the switch onto a favorable matchup. From there, all he has to do is go to work, get to his spot, and rise up for a high percentage shot. This is really tough to cover because in order to avoid the switch, that usually means you have to put two on the ball, even if it's very brief. And KD will make the right pass, putting his team in a position to attack with an advantage. To be honest though, these screens aren't always about creating a switch or an advantage. A lot of the time, they're just meant to serve as another method of creating space for Durant in the middle of the floor. For the entirety of Mike Budenholzer's coaching career, maybe his biggest trait has been the way he spaces the floor for his star players, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing this season. Durant is at his best in the middle of the floor, so if you're able to create an offensive setup that consistently finds him in single covers near the free throw line, a lot of good things are gonna happen. If you remember in the past, that wasn't always the case, and KD has shown to struggle a bit with helping defenders sitting in those gaps. That's how Boston got to him in the 2022 first round. He's working against Horford in isolation, uses some shifty dribbling to get by his hip, only for Tatum to aggressively jump him at the nail. Because of his lengthy frame, it's really tough to dribble through that type of attention, so when attacking the middle, it felt like his only option was to pull up for absolutely smothered jumpers. As a result, he was often pushed into wider driving angles going towards the baseline and basically spent the entire series outside of the paint. Compare that to a play from this season. Tyus Jones enters the ball to KD in the middle and immediately clears out with a cut to the baseline. With Booker again positioned closer to the corner, you'll notice that there aren't any potential nail helpers. Durant's left in single coverage, and we all know how that goes. Obviously, defenses don't want to leave him one-on-one, but with nobody on the wing, nail help has to come all the way from the corner, and that's just a really easy read to make, resulting in a wide open three. So what ends up happening a lot of the time is that when the ball gets entered to KD in the middle and that wing clears out with a cut, the Suns start with 4 guys positioned along the baseline and nobody near the wings. That means no nail help, which means easy buckets for Durant. And when I say easy buckets, I'm not just talking about that surgical mid-range shot making, because when he has this much space to operate, not only is he a threat to shoot, he's a threat to drive. Since the Achilles injury, it's felt like his rim pressure had slowly but surely been phased out to the point where he was getting to the rim less than a lot of spot-up shooters. I'm not saying he's been Ja Morant this season, but he is getting to the rim at a higher rate than in any of the last 3 years, and that's a big deal because not only does that mean he's getting more layups and dunks himself, it means he's putting himself in a position to draw more fouls, and it means he's putting more stress on the defense, collapsing help and opening up more passing windows. When you pair the added rim frequency with a career high in three-point volume, it paints a pretty interesting picture of a more analytical Kevin Durant. For the first time in 8 years, more than 50% of his shots have come either at the rim or from 3. And considering how efficient he is from both of those ranges, it gives his scoring a much higher ceiling. Then you still have the GOAT level mid-range scoring, but even that's been a little different. The long twos are almost gone, as he's been doing most of his work from 15 feet in, and I think that's been especially easy to notice down the stretch of close games. Phoenix has played in a lot of these clutch moments. In the final 30 seconds against Philly, he isolated from up top with no sort of help near the right elbow, so when he drives, there's nobody in position to stop him from getting to the rim. Same thing in the final 3 minutes against the Heat. With nobody on the wing, there's nobody to bring help to the middle, and he easily rises up over Tyler Hero. A couple minutes later, he again had Hero on him in the middle, and this time Miami's gonna try a pre-switch before he touches the ball, but all that does is leave him with room to turn and shoot off the catch. And finally, to ice the game in the final 20 seconds, he's facing up Highsmith from out near the three-point line, where it becomes blatantly obvious how impossible it is to contest that jumper. We saw the same thing against the Clippers, where no nail help allowed him to slowly work his way to his spots in the middle, and all-time shot making handles the rest. Then in Dallas, it was the added three-point volume, absolutely torching them in the fourth as he went shot for shot with Kyrie. It's actually hard to put into words how absurdly good KD's been in clutch time, and how many more wins the Suns have simply because of that fact. On the season, they have a record of 10-2 with him in the lineup, and typically that sort of win total comes with a huge point differential, but they've had a net rating of plus 4.7 in those games. That's very good, but just for some context, teams like the Cavs, Thunder, and Celtics all land around plus 10. What that tells us is that they've won a lot of tight games. To be exact, of those 10 wins, 8 of them have ended within single digits, and 9 of them have ended within a 12-point margin. The only blowout they've had came against the Lakers in KD's return from injury. Speaking of which, in the 7 games KD missed, they had a measly net rating of negative 10.2 and a record of 1-6, with their one win coming against the Jazz. Going back to what I was saying about winning games in the clutch though, I'll leave you with a stat that I find to be pretty mind-boggling. Of course, by isolating the end of games, we're gonna get really small sample sizes of numbers, but on playbyplaystats.com, we can actually filter team performance by the leverage of moments, meaning we can look at how specific lineups are performing in garbage time, or on the opposite end, those crucial minutes. According to play-by-play stats, the Suns have played 48 high-leveraged minutes this season. In the 33 they played with KD, they had a net rating of 44.3 with an offensive rating of 144.3. In the 15 they played without him, they had a net rating of negative 45.4 with an offensive rating of 96.6. Take those samples with a grain of salt, but to me that just lines up with everything we've seen on the tape. Through 3 quarters, KD can give his team high-level scoring in a variety of ways, whether that means in the open floor or in the half court, with or without the ball, but when push comes to shove, the way the Suns space the court for KD to isolate in the middle of the floor is basically the best shot any team has of winning a close game. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Durant. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.